cracking, everybody? My name is Akira the Don, artist, wave lord, architect of the MEANINGWAVE universe. MEANINGWAVE being a psychotechnology and musical story that I created in order to assist people with achieving their potential in this lifetime. And yeah, that's that. An invite from someone. We've got someone very special coming in today, and we are here today because we got a brand new album. This is actually the second album that we've done. I've taken the audio, the vocal audio from Naval's famous "How to Get Rich" tweet storm spoken thing, and I actually, when I first read that, I was like, "Holy shit! I need to turn this into a record." And at that point, it had not been spoken, and yeah, and I remember hitting up Naval and saying, "Hey, could you record this? It would be a really good album." But anyway, I would rather talk about that with Naval than without. And I believe Naval is here. Hi, Naval.
How are you? Thanks for doing the album. The ultimate form of leverage is doing nothing and having other people spread your content around in new forms. So thanks for the free leverage.
Yeah, well, it goes both ways, right? It's kind of amazing how that happens.
Exactly.
Do you remember that when I can't remember exactly how first I approached you to do a record, and I can't remember if it was that instant.
I don't remember, honestly. I originally did the tweet storm, which was sort of a, how should I say it? It was like a very quick off the cuff thing. It was a very spontaneous thing. Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it for a while, and I had a few notes scattered here and there, but I do that a lot. So I have tons of tweet storms and things that are just right in a huge notepad to myself that never make it out into the world, the vast majority. And there were a couple of snippets lying around. And then I was feeling this, I don't know, one of the things that I've said is that inspiration is perishable, act on it immediately.
Actually, I could play it. I mean, it's a great record.
Yeah, sure.
Inspiration is perishable. When you have your inspiration, do it right then and there. Inspiration is perishable. When you have your inspiration, do it right then and there. 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 Inspiration is perishable. When you have your inspiration,
do it right then and there. Do it right then and there.
Yeah, that's the part.
Everyone can sing it.
Right, that's a podcast version. My tweet version is a little different, which is more compact because on Twitter every word counts. And so on Twitter I said inspiration is perishable, act on it immediately. And so I try to follow that. I also do the opposite, which is if I'm not inspired, just don't do it. And so I wasn't inspired. So I wasn't inspired because these little snippets were floating around my head and they weren't coherent. And then one night I went to bed and I've been thinking about it before I went to bed. And I woke up at 3 a.m. and it was just the whole thing was in my head. and I hammered it out on my iPad while sitting in bed. And then I went back to bed. So that was it. So
I had a feeling it was sort of that.
Yeah, I was inspired, so I did it. But I think the equally important corollary was when I wasn't inspired, I didn't do it. And I had to wait for the inspiration. And I would say when I look back at all the best writing I've ever done, it followed that exact pattern.
Yeah, it's exactly the same with me and records. It was the same with the first. I remembered it now. The first thing I did with your voice was I heard you on Tim Ferriss, and you were talking really excitedly about like reading, the joy of reading, and habits. And I was walking around Los Angeles just doing some errands, and I had that on, and I literally had to like run home and make it into a record pretty much straight away. And I think I'd laid out that whole first Naval Wave mixtape in a couple of hours. Like the whole
in a way, one of the huge advantages of these modern tools that we have is that we can just do things when we're inspired as opposed to when we have to schedule them and prep them. So it is a golden age of creativity. Like one of the more unpopular tweets I think I put out a long time back, I forget the exact verbiage, but it was something like, we're living in the golden era of art. We just don't notice it because there's too much abundance. We have a tendency to go back and look at art from older times to be like, oh, that was real art. No, there's probably more amazing art being created today than at any other point in history. it's just buried, it's drowned because there's a very low signal to noise ratio. It's just so easy to create art that there's just a lot more of it being created. So finding the so-called good stuff is much harder. But that's okay. People also don't necessarily have to agree on what's good and what's not. Although I do believe that there is some objective basis to beauty, but nevertheless, we don't all have to agree upon what affects us at a given time. So different people may disagree. There might not be a convergence on a single person like a Mozart or a Beethoven in their time, but at the same time, I do think that we are living in the golden era of art thanks to all the tools that we have.
Those things tend to be viewed in hindsight anyway. It's like, most of the sort of artists that you hear about were starving in their lifetime or died destitute or whatever. Even the
guy it's one of the ways it's one of the ways I know in which I'm not very good because I'm popular in my own time. So that well, right there says that I'm not now. Saying. Yeah.
This is what is different now, though, because as you were saying, back in the day, maybe there were people creating beautiful things, but most people never got to experience them because they were far too busy digging holes to poop in or whatever it is they were
exactly.
doing that day. People weren't witnessing all this wonderful art. People used to go. I remember realizing the point of stained glass windows is because you couldn't see color anywhere else. So the churches would put that stained glass in, and people would go there just to look at that.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I agree. We didn't used to have the spread of creativity and information at the rate that we do today. So obviously it is easier for someone to be good and famous in their own time. At the same time, there's another subtlety, which is I think people who are really good writers, they write the truth, and the truth is often socially unacceptable within their time. And it's only 50 or 100 years later when like the sting of it is taken out that people can look back on it more objectively. The other thing is that it's nature of a writer to just be kind of trapped in their own time, like they make references to their politics and to their preferences. And so that's inevitably going to be polarizing to someone who has different politics and preferences. But if you're reading someone from hundreds of years ago, none of it makes sense. None of the politics or preferences matter anymore. You're just looking at the underlying lasting content. So
it's even as close as like 20 or 30.
Yeah, that's right.
Like
because politics in some sense, these are fashion and fads and they come and go.
And actors and things of that nature. I was listening to Earl Nightingale recently. And none of his references, I didn't know who any of them were, pretty much. And he was talking in the 50s.
Yeah, one of the interesting things also is certain mediums, I think, or certain kinds of media age better than others. Like you could have made an amazing movie, but there's just a whole generation of people who won't watch it because it's black and white. Or you made the best silent action movie ever, but how many people are going to see it later on? So the more you get to just pure distilled information, just words, the more likely it is that your message will spread. So I do think, for example, an archived podcast or an archived text or archived music have much longer range reach than, say, video. Right? Video content is not as timeless. It will appear dated.
Almost instantly, weirdly, especially with the speed at which culture is rampaging currently. You can literally look at stuff from a couple of years ago and it looks strange and discordant. This is why I very specifically I very rarely edit anything anybody said in my songs. But for example, the Scott Adams record I did, I removed any references to contemporary politicians or human beings because the message of what he was talking about in that record, which was, as he described, the user interface for reality, was a timeless message. But the second you attach contemporary events or people to it, like you were saying, not only can it date it horribly, it can create associations with people which hinder the usefulness.
Yeah, some while back, I forget, maybe when Clubhouse really started getting underway, I stopped tweeting for a while. And it wasn't a deliberate thing. It was just I was less interested in Twitter because now I could say things in context in Clubhouse as opposed to context free in Twitter. And what was interesting was I would go check the mentions occasionally, and my account was growing just as fast as it was before, if not faster. There were more mentions, there were more people talking, there were more people finding the content. And I think the reason is because the content was created to be relatively timeless, so it can keep spreading. An account that's talking about politics has to just continue putting out political content because it goes stale almost the instant that it's out. All the news journalists who think they're building followings, they're not. They're building followings as long as they continue to work. So basically, if you're building a following based on politics or journalism or timely things, you're renting out your time. What you're doing is you're getting a higher and higher hourly rate, but you're still renting out your time. But if you're creating timeless content, then you have compounding principles. You're no longer renting your time; it's all leveraged. But it wasn't so deliberate. It was just accidental because I'm just not interested in as much in contemporary things.
Yeah, well, all that stuff is boring, and it's very much like building your house on quicksand. It's the speed with which it becomes irrelevant. I often find myself returning to amused chimps Twitter.
That is still my favorite Twitter account of all time.
I used to think that was you. For a while, I just thought, that's
I wish that was
Naval's.
Me. No.
I return to that like at least once a month or something. And there's it's entirely relevant.
He did contact me on Twitter long after retirement, like years after his disappearance. Yeah, and he sent me a couple of his draft tweets. But it's one of those things though that sort of destroys the magic for you. It's like if a magician shows up and starts showing you like all the little parts and pieces that he used for his tricks, it takes away more than it adds. So I skimmed him and nothing jumped out, but it was because he put 10 or 15 of them together in a string, and they weren't his best work, but they were still good work. Amused Chimp, I think, to me was the peak of Twitter. I haven't seen anything as good since.
That was the point when I'd literally tell people, Twitter's really good because, there's a load of morons on there, but you can ignore them and you can just not follow them, right? And you can mute certain things if you wish to. But there's wonderful things like this amused chimp. I would use that as a reason for people to go on Twitter. I can't think of a reason to give people to go on Twitter these days.
There's a few accounts that I really enjoy, like, Morgan Housel is one of them, and I don't know. There's quite a few accounts that I still enjoy. There's this one, Ascendant Power, Fit Founder. There's a bunch of others I follow, but I don't follow in the traditional sense. I follow on lists.
There is great stuff on there. It's just it's just increasingly difficult to weed out the noise, even when you do smart things like set your location to Tokyo, which I do, so I don't have to look at trending topics.
Well, Twitter trending topics is utter trash. I mean, it's like a campus high school.
I just see Japanese. All I see is Japanese.
That's smart.
It is beautiful.
I see a high school newspaper, written by some very angry sociology major. is what I see. It's awful. It makes me want to puke. Like, I can't.
I used to have a thing in
Twitter.
I used to have a thing in the UK. I don't live in the UK anymore, but in the UK, it's impossible to avoid the newsstand. Everywhere you go, there's a newsstand, and it's just blaring its horror and pornography of whatever. And one of the things I loved about America was you didn't see these newsstands everywhere, and you could kind of walk around and avoid that whole side of life. If you weren't deliberately watching television, you could avoid that. And then it started to sneak in via social media around 2013. And once again became difficult to avoid. So I feel like a large part of my life is this constant trying to kind of create systems to stop this stuff entering my world.
Well, you can't, because politics is about power, and now everything has become politicized because people are trying to seize power in every part of every domain, right? So all the classic institutions are up for grabs. The internet is causing big power shifts, and everybody wants power, so they're trying to redefine everything from, how society is run and should work, and what mathematics is and what's settled science and not, and all those kinds of things, right? These are all power grabs. COVID was a giant power struggle, right? You can see the winners versus the losers very clearly. Mm-hmm. And so unfortunately, everything has become politicized, and you can't hide from politics anymore, because at some level politics finds you, right? Like if you're in a country that's undergoing a revolution, eventually they'll come door to door and with guns, so you can't hide from it forever. But it is awful. I mean, you can definitely not exacerbate the situation, right? And I think at some level, the way to sort of, as a good civil member of society, stand up to these people is to be intolerant of the intolerant. And I define intolerant people as the ones who want to suppress speech and control other people. So that to me is how you identify the intolerant people. They tell you what you can't say. They'll punish you for they punish you for your speech because they can't punish you for your thoughts, right? Really, they want to control your thoughts. And so to me, the intolerant are the people who are trying to censor your speech. And these are the people who have to be resisted with all of your might if you want civil society to continue to exist. Because the moment an authoritarian gets hold of the censorship capability, whether it's for quote unquote good or evil, they all think they're acting for good, then they essentially take over society and lead to stagnation and repression. Where I do get political is on defending the First Amendment. I think that is, the core of the American experiment. And I am pro Second Amendment, not in the sense that I own a gun. I don't grow up with that hunting culture, and I don't want to live in an urban environment full of guns. But on the other hand, I understand what happens to societies over a long period of time where you disarm the population. You just have too high of a catastrophic failure risk of some dictator seizing power. And people who say, well, you can't fight tanks and airplanes just have no idea how civil wars and military history and guerrilla warfare works. It's just complete ignorance. But that's what you get from non-gun owners, right? They don't actually understand how violence works. And no matter how you may want to paint society as this beautiful collection of voters who are voting their preferences, ultimately everything is backed up by violence, everything. So if you don't see the person with a gun in charge, you just haven't looked closely enough. There's always someone with a gun in charge, and you cannot disenfranchise the people who have the means of violence in any society for very long, because eventually they just take over. It's like in Rome when there was a Praetorian Guard that used to protect the emperors, because it just became a very warlike society, and the emperors had to be protected by their guards. Well, no surprise, the last bunch of emperors were all former Praetorian Guards, just like today. In Soviet Russia, it's not Soviet Russia, but whatever Russia is, it's all run by ex-KGB and ex-FSB. It's all run by ex. So you could see that happen in the United States. You give these people too much power to censor what other people think and say. You give them the power to control the media and the speech apparatus, and you will end up with former CIA and FBI officials in charge eventually of the whole country. It'll be the same thing. So I do believe.
I mean, it started here a while ago with George Bush.
It has.
Quite explicitly, explicitly.
And it has continued, in every administration, Republican or Democrat. It's just gotten worse. I don't think Bush alone was to blame. Although I think the Patriot Act was awful. Let's see what the COVID reactions also create in terms of more of a surveillance state. But now you have things like modern monetary theory and calls for censorship being paddled around. I mean, these are just complete nonsense, like failure of basic mathematics and civics. But I do fear that the Enlightenment experiment, the Enlightenment era values of reason and debate and logic and science and testability and free speech are very much under attack. It would be sad for us if those were extinguished, because we would actually enter secular stagnation. We don't need another Russia, right? The United States is unique. We actually don't even need another Europe. Europe has been very much on the, at least parts of it has been very much in the decline for a long time. So the United States is kind of a unique experiment in freedom, with both political freedoms and economic freedoms and social freedoms. You don't find that combination elsewhere in the world as much. It's hard to. I don't know of any other place in the world where you have free speech enshrined in the Constitution, plus you have the right to bear arms, plus you have 50 different states they can move around on, plus the powers that are not enumerated to the government are left to the people. So those kinds of strong freedoms just don't exist anywhere else in the world. And that's why it's such a beacon for immigration, because people want to get here because it's free. It's free to experiment. It's free to do new things. But it seems that those freedoms are under attack. And ironically, from a
there's a reason you and I both came here. We're both immigrants. We both came here. We both did well here. I'm earlier in my stage than you, and it is really, really tragic that the things that make it so valuable, appealing, useful in the world context are the things that are under attack. And I'm seeing all over the place, like people like, okay, so where do we go now? And there isn't. Where do you go now?
There is nowhere else. Yeah, there's nowhere else to go. Nassim Taleb had a really good observation in his Skin in the Game book, where he talks about the minority rule, and where he points out it's not majorities that run the world, it's intolerant minorities, because the centrists just want to get along, they don't want to make trouble. So if you have intolerant minorities who will become hysterical, scream, shout, call you names, try and cancel you, then you have the centrists just kind of go along, and then these intolerant minorities will pick off individuals one at a time. And the internet makes that easier than ever by forming flash mobs, and then they cancel people, and the rest of the people get cowed into silence, and they're just, they can't even say certain things. You're not even allowed. There are basic parts of biology you are no longer allowed to discuss, or you'll get canceled, which is insane, right? That's a science. And it needs to be free to explore the science. And so you can kind of just see this creeping invasion, this fungus of the social sciences, which is destroying the natural sciences. The natural sciences normally take their feedback from nature, from reality. The economic sciences normally take their feedback from free markets. The social sciences, unfortunately, take their feedback from society. So they're basically just voting. They're just politics by another name. So if you're getting a degree in social science, I am sorry to tell you that you're just getting a degree in politics, which is probably a pretty worthless degree, except in a world that's run entirely by politics, which is not a world you want to live in, because it's a pretty destitute society. So unfortunately,
we've read lots of books about that world.
Yes, exactly. And these social sciences are unfortunately now this creeping fungus that is destroying the natural sciences, and has already corrupted the economic sciences to a huge degree, and is busy corrupting the natural sciences. So to the point where in economics, you can safely dismiss macroeconomics. It's all just been taken over. So it's very hard to find the truth in macroeconomics. It's just politics with a lot of math. And when you get into the natural sciences, you can see the further removed you are from pure mathematics, the more it's under attack. But they're going to get all the way up the chain eventually.
It's interesting, as just as this is happening, a possible solution or other way emerges in the form of blockchain, right?
Yeah, it's not just crypto, but I would more broadly characterize it as the internet. Someone very intelligent.
Next internet.
Someone very intelligently just a long time ago said that the internet views censorship as damage and routes around it. So that's really interesting, right? The internet is a neural network of sorts, and in a neural network, you're just trying to transmit information the most clearly. And when something gets censored, if it gets blocked, like information can't travel through here, that is literally damage. So an efficient system will find a way to route around it. It's a cancer that you just kind of have to get around. And so the internet is, in a sense, and I'm not saying it's a conscious entity, but I'm saying in an evolutionary sense, it is being put under evolutionary pressure, where a lot of the information that wants to flow on the internet cannot flow, because it's gotten trapped in these centralized platforms that are now starting to engage in heavy-handed censorship far beyond the First Amendment, and are being run by an unaccountable group of very small algorithm writers and censors who basically just do whatever they want. And I've interacted with these people, and they are nowhere near as high-minded as they pretend to be. Most of them are incredibly political. They have clear agendas, and they're acting on them in subtle ways by putting their thumbs in the scale. And they know that nobody will notice, because they literally control the means of speech. And you'll have a few misguided lunatics who don't understand network effects and natural monopolies will say, but they're private companies, they can do whatever they want. But of course, if their views were being suppressed, they would sing a different tune immediately, because the test of any good system is you hand it over to your enemies, and you let them run it for a while. And if then you see what the system is all about. And of course, they're not willing to do that. They're in charge, so they'll justify it any which way. In any case, the internet views this censorship as damaged, and there's these groups of people who are going to route around it. Now, luckily, many of the people who rail against censorship, who are not happy about it, they're actually the brightest people around. They're the clearest thinkers. And among them was whoever was Satoshi Nakamoto, and then, of course, Vitalik Buterin, and people like Zuko, and so on. And they have started building the infrastructure to create a censorship-resistant internet. And it starts out with money, because if you can create censorship-resistant money, and money is the most important, let's put it, money is the largest bounty item in the world. Money, to most people, money is the most important thing, and they'll do anything to get it. And so therefore, if you can create a money that cannot be stolen or cannot be hacked or cannot be stopped, if you can create unstoppable money, then you can create unstoppable anything. And so Bitcoin is the experiment to create unstoppable money. And then from that comes Ethereum, which is the experiment to create unstoppable applications, starting with financial applications, because those are the only ones that are valuable enough to kind of take on the load of a creaky, new, expensive technology like blockchains. But then over time, you're seeing other things are going to start emerging: gaming networks, social networks, and now you're seeing with NFTs, these title registries for art and music, and all kinds of representations of physical assets into digital assets. So we're basically seeing blockchains, I believe, are going to wholesale replace gigantic chunks of the internet. Until 20 years from now, it's going to be unfathomable to run an internet without blockchains. Unfathomable. You will not be able to do it. It will be like going back from smartphones to flip phones to those little bricks or the landlines. It'll be ludicrously stupid. And what will be really interesting to me is, first, of course, the transformation of the internet into a true free domain. But then secondly, will be how totalitarian societies react to this. So someone like China, who's built the Great Firewall this entire time, they think the threat from Bitcoin is it's a digital currency. So they're creating the Chinese digital currency. That's not the threat. The threat is that the internet itself becomes an uncensorable free market of encrypted information and data and communications. And if you don't adopt that one, then you're living in an older, broken version of the internet. And maybe somehow they'll be able to force their poor population that has no choice to go along with it, but they're not going to be able to control the rest of the world that way. Certainly, any society that I think has a blockchain-enabled internet will be decades ahead of one that doesn't.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see what our ruling class does about that. I don't know if ruling class is the right word, but these people that we've been talking about,
the elite class.
What are they going to do about that?
I mean, they're not going to be happy about it. But at the same time, one of the huge trends with the internet is destroying institutions and replacing them with individuals, and it's doing that by exposing the illegitimacy and how unnecessary all these gatekeepers were. Like, look at all the journalists who are lobbying for Twitter and Clubhouse to censor because they want to be the censors, right? Look at all the academics who will rail against crypto because they want to be the ones who are allocating where resources go in modern society. Look at how Wall Street's going to react to crypto, right? So you're going to have huge pushback. But at the same time, I think the crypto revolution is really interesting because it's individuals first, right? Individuals front ran institutions. To this day, there are more individuals who are into it than institutions. Individuals are getting these incredible yields in decentralized finance. Individuals are the ones who are front running Bitcoin before the big institutions come in later this year. And of course, it's a crazy Wild West. I'm not recommending anyone who isn't willing to truly understand at a technical and financial level to get into it. But the reason why fortunes are being made in crypto is because it is true Wild West. It's unoccupied territory. It's new land. So people are going out there and staking the new land. But it's just as dangerous and just as crazy and just as scammy as the Wild West. And institutions don't know how to function in these environments because institutions move through consensus. And only an individual can really seek the truth. And a group has to have consensus. If it doesn't have consensus, it falls apart. It's no longer a group. So a group is what forms after you've figured out how to solve a problem. So you set out to solve a problem. Usually it's an individual or two or three who solve the problem, and then they form a group to implement the solution. But groups themselves do not solve problems. And so these groups can keep institutions alive, cannot go and create new things. And so they are going to, it's just a question of when, it's not a question of if. They're going to get overrun by the internet, and we're going to have much more fluid institutions that are formed on demand as needed, but will be based on the individuals and based on merit. So for example, what are you and I doing here? In a pre-internet era, we would have never
You try convincing an A&R person or a record label that this is a good idea.
Exactly. But you have, so I get invited by journalists on their, I get invited by journalists on their podcasts where they want to interview me or they want to write about me in the newspaper or they want me on their radio show. Like, why do I need an intermediary? We don't need any more intermediaries. We can all go direct. Why do you need a PR firm? What is a journalist? A journalist is just someone with a Twitter following. In fact, it's funny to watch a bunch of journalists now railing against Substack and talking about how Substack is evil. Substack is just choice. It's a choice to go out on your own. And what's incredible to me is like all the good journalists are leaving for Substack. If you can't run your own Substack, that means that you're one of the journalists who is being subsidized in the past by the journalists who can run their own Substack. And so what you're going to see is all the good journalists are going to go onto Substack, all the bad ones are going to be left behind. And what we're seeing is a squandering of these incredible brands like the New York Times and the Washington Post and Journal and all these brands. These brands were built up over hundreds of years, and now we're going to spend them hard in the next few years and maybe the next decade, where the normal person who can't be bothered, isn't paying attention, might be like, oh yeah, New York Times, and continues to believe it. But I think that the next generation will consider these brands to be utterly useless and will instead just subscribe to whichever journalist or whichever person that they feel best represents
It's people, yeah.
reality for them. Exactly, it's people.
I'm sure you see this with your children. I have an 8-year-old, and he doesn't have any kind of loyalty or affinity to any corporation or body or magazine or anything. He has individuals, and when those individuals become untrustworthy or he falls out of line with them for whatever reason, he finds another one.
Yeah,
that's that.
Yeah, that's also a reason why people have a hard time wrapping their head around NFTs, because that is loyalty to individual artists, right? It's not like, oh, the institutions say that Leonardo da Vinci is a good artist, or the gallery says it's the new hot modern art person. No, the individuals are basically deciding for themselves and forming a micro community around the artist. And it's up to the artist to be full stack, to engage, to market, to serve, and to help, and to create. But now these direct relationships don't require any intermediation. They don't require any institutions in the way. Now, the bad news is that how are these individuals connecting with each other? Well, they're connecting with each other through these massive platforms. So instead of having 20 gatekeepers, 20 old world offline gatekeepers, we have one online gatekeeper. But even there, I think, and those gatekeepers themselves have become very comfortable with the use of power. Like Andrew Chen just joined; he's on the board of Clubhouse and invested in it. So this is a good time to smash Clubhouse, right? Which is Clubhouse is the latest example of these kinds of gatekeepers, which is great. It enables us in so many levels, but one of the big problems I have with Clubhouse is that they're also engaging in moderation and censorship. And right now it's light-handed, but you can bet as they become more and more powerful, it'll become more and more heavy-handed, which is why I look forward to trying other platforms if Clubhouse even continues down the moderation and censorship path. Moderation is just a nice way of saying we just block whatever we don't like. And you can see how it got really out of control on Twitter and Facebook in the last few years when the masks came off. And so I just think that any ability to censor is the problem. Ultimately, like Google used to say, don't be evil, and they took that away because that, it's just too tempting. Even if the founders believe that, the founders eventually don't end up running the company.
Well, it's like you were talking about earlier. You have a couple of people, some individuals will create something, and then in will come a big group, and then the group will start making these big group sort of decisions and move in that fashion, and the thing will usually be destroyed.
Yeah, the group will operate through consensus. The consensus will be set by the most intolerant minority. So you'll have an intolerant minority within the group who will control the group, and then use it to consensus and groupthink. But it also sows the seeds of its own destruction down the line, because then they get fat and happy, and they're like, great, now we're all set, we run the world. But you've lost all the creators, you've lost all the innovators. The one brilliant engineer who could think for themselves kind of slinked out the back door because they want to have nothing to do with this, and then they're going to go create the next crypto-based Clubhouse or the next crypto-based Twitter that is going to eventually just steamroll the existing social networks.
Yeah, even in a situation, because I think about this stuff, and you go, like, say the way Disney operates these days. You're like, why are they doing these things when it's definitely not making them money and it's definitely losing them money? And you go, well, there's no competition. They have no real impetus to have to operate in that fashion anymore. But as you were saying, once you get to the point where like literally no one of any worth at all will work there, and no one's paying attention to the thing, and meanwhile someone's set up shop next door and they've built this new way of communicating and this new way of telling stories that's impervious.
Yeah, someone like Disney is relying upon brand and distribution, and that's getting weaker and weaker by the day, because distribution is no longer through their movie theaters and their shelf space. It's through Netflix, and it's through any old website. So
anyone can stream to a TV now.
Exactly.
Is Clubhouse? Can you stream Clubhouse to a TV? Of course you can. So we are now
Yeah,
competing with
yeah.
Disney Plus right now.
Exactly. And at least we're competing for the time and the attention. But
Yeah.
the modern platforms rely on a much more insidious thing, which is they rely upon network effects. And network effects in an olden day, used to form slowly over time. And people realized, like, okay, it only makes sense to run one fiber cable, into the neighborhood, because the moment a competitor shows up, the incumbent can just drop prices because they have a sunk cost. They can provide it for free, drive the competitor out of business, and go back to raising prices. So these monopolists naturally form as utilities in power and electricity and telephone. And so we have to regulate them as such. So they have to become common carriers. And utilities are common carriers, and they're forced to carry all content because it's too much power to leave up to a private corporation. In fact, in Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash book, the guy who kind of takes over the world, it's a futuristic book, a really good sci-fi thriller. The guy who takes over the world is actually the billionaire or the multi-billionaire who basically lays all the fiber cable to everybody's homes. He's unregulated, so he controls all the information going into your home. And in that book, he's a Christian fanatic, but it turns out to be the exact opposite, right? It turns out that the cable layers are regulated as common carriers, but now you have these social networks built on top that are not regulated as utilities or as common carriers because they moved too fast and it happened too quickly, and people didn't realize that they'd seized the means of information dissemination. And so now they've taken over the cables, and the multi-billionaires who run this are the Zucks and the Jacks of the world, and maybe Paul Davison eventually, and nobody gets to tell them what to do. It's unfortunate, but we found ourselves in a different dystopian hell than the one he laid out. But it's actually similar. It's virtual cables rather than physical cables.
Yes, and here we are. But how long can that last realistically?
I mean, it can last for a while. Unfortunately, I don't think these things happen that quickly. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. The network effects are incredibly powerful. It's very, very hard to switch, right? In that sense, like the strongest network effect is probably in Twitter and Facebook, where you have these tight social graphs. Twitter's is probably the strongest because it's a cross person social lab, right? It's a social graph. It's a cross friendship. So in Facebook, it's just your friend circle. So in theory, the people that are the most important to you on Facebook, you know them in real life. So you could move to another place and take them with you. In Twitter, you don't even know who the heck your followers are. You have no idea, and you have no way to find them in the future if you were to move. It's not like Twitter's giving you their email address. When they cancel you, they intend to punish you. If Twitter didn't want to punish you, they would export their graph, and maybe you have an email address or a newsletter or something where people could subscribe to you and follow you another way. But Twitter intends to punish you. They're vindictive, and so so you unfortunately the social graph portability doesn't exist, and so you get locked into these social networks. And Twitter has probably the most powerful network effect. I think Clubhouse is a little bit weaker. Especially, there's two kinds of Clubhouse. Clubhouse is actually multiple apps running in one, or multiple networks. And one of those is we're here to socialize, like a cocktail party. And that has a very powerful network effect because that's just based on, critical mass and demographics and so on. So once people are in one network, you just want to go where the best cocktail party is. You want to go where the best conversations are. So you just show up to that one. But there's a different effect on Clubhouse, which is you're going there to listen to a specific person that you're really interested in. And so you're coming there to listen to me or to you. And so when we tweet out, people show up based on where we are. So if I did this talk on Twitter Spaces, I expect to probably have just as many people, right? They just have to download an app and they're interested in listening to me, and there they are. So Clubhouse doesn't really have a lock on people like us. Who are kind of the larger creators with their own independent followings. Unfortunately, where our hands are tied are on Twitter, because Twitter is where we spread the information. So in that sense, Twitter is kind of the crown jewel of the social networks because it has the most unreplicatable one-way follow graph that can be used as a broadcast media to alert people to anything else. So the fact that Twitter has become so censorious and so kind of controlled by whatever they call their internal trust and safety team is awful. It's really bad. But I hope that some blockchain-based alternatives will be emerging. There are already one or two out there, and there's going to be a bunch more.
Yeah.
And one of the things that blockchains are really good at is solving the critical mass problem, at breaking network effects. This to me is the David versus Goliath fight of the 21st century, which is, can a blockchain-based social network using the power of incentives and open programmability and permission. So there's four things the blockchain-based social network brings to the fight that are unique, right? If you look on one hand, there's Goliath, which is a Twitter or a Facebook, where they seem like they have unlimited resources, they have massive network effect, huge amounts of content. How are you ever going to get people off of it? But if you flip the other side, what David has four little weapons. David has payments built in, which are so you can build in money, and money is a very powerful incentive. We see how tokens and blockchains are kind of drive people nuts almost, especially, and early adopters get rewarded. So now you have a social network where the early adopters, if they're right, if they pick the winning social network of the future correctly, they become millionaires, right?
Well,
and that's a very
trick,
powerful incentive for. Yeah, that is a huge trick. So payments are a big deal. The second piece is permanence. You can't get canceled. So now you can rest at least a lot more assured that every follower you collect will be your follower forever, right? That's to the extent that you keep them interested, engaged, of course, but you're not going to lose them. A third one is you get permissionless programmability, and don't underestimate this at all. This isn't just APIs. This is completely open source because the data is protected inside the blockchain through private keys by each user. The network itself, can be completely open. The source code can be out there, so people can take these blockchain-based social networks and start doing remixes on them. And that's why you and I are here, because you remix my content. But now these are coders, engineers, designers remixing each other's content, and they're going to create incredible clients. And then finally, there's peer governance, which is to the extent that there is any governance in these networks, which will be, I think, much lower than there is in something like Twitter, it'll be done at a peer level. So, for example, today on Twitter, there's only one editor, right? Think of Twitter as like a giant newspaper where there are lots and lots of writers and there's lots and lots of readers, but there's only one editor, and that editor is Twitter, right? So that editor is a very heavy-handed boss, usually most of the times ignoring everything, can't do anything, and then once in a blue moon will swoop down and just smash somebody. Whereas if you look at a blockchain-based social network, they will have a distributed hierarchy of editors. You can literally choose which editor that you want to follow, and based on their mutant block lists and the mutant block lists of the people that they subscribe to, you will get your own customized Twitter. So I think these four different pieces, peer governance, permissionless programmability, payments, and permanence, are what are going to be the real weapons that blockchain-based social networks bring to the fight. And I think it'll be really interesting because just as Bitcoin is showing that if you can create unstoppable money, then you can create unstoppable anything digital. The same way, I think that the blockchain-based social networks will show if you can break Twitter's network effect, then you can break any digital network effect.
Yeah, and that applies to everything. I've been saying this in the beginning. Everything that happens in the music industry will happen everywhere else. The music industry, their fatal mistake, people wanted to get music quickly, and they stopped them. You couldn't legally download an MP3, so Napster had to exist. Which then created the foundation for all manner of things that occurred after that. And then once eventually the record label said, okay, Spotify, you can exist, but you have to give us a huge amount of shares and this, that, and the other. What came into being was the culture of curators, because there was suddenly so much music flowing in. It was the culture of curators. It was playlists. And then suddenly a random kid on the other side of the world who's just got really good taste becomes one of the most powerful people in the music industry because he's got good taste and he's got a cool playlist. And that playlist is now pushing all those streams.
And I don't even think we're done on the music industry disruption yet, right? We're just getting started. There's of course the whole there's the whole NFT thing, but there's also keep in mind that Spotify and these kind of controlled streaming music players, they're to some extent controlled by the proprietary device operating systems that we're running. So we're talking here on iPhone, and your only other alternative is Android. Well, how come BitTorrent or Napster or something like that doesn't come back from the dead and just crush Spotify? It should just be a free version that's going to have everything, right? And the reason is because the app stores won't let it on. So this is the one that I don't have a solution to. I do believe that, unfortunately, the way mobile phones are designed, they're such difficult pieces of hardware to build and manufacture and ship at scale, and they cost money. So I think here people kind of give up their freedom very easily. And then once most people in your network have given up the freedom easily, then you're using some weird open phone that can run any app, but most of your friends and family are running phones that are still very tightly controlled. So ultimately, the ultimate monopolists are Apple and Google, and whatever they say goes. So even if someone were to, for example, even if someone were to say, hey, I have a good social network and I'm shipping the app and it's going to be uncensored, or at least you get to choose your own editors and you get to block out whoever you think is putting up bad content, or let's call it peer govern as opposed to top down govern or corporate govern. Unfortunately, Apple and Google will just block it, as we've seen them already start doing. So they are the ultimate monopolists. And in my opinion, the trust and safety divisions and the moderators and the censors at Apple and Google are probably the biggest threats to a free society.
Yeah. So what do we do about them?
I don't know. One problem at a time, please.
I don't know. It seemed we were getting through pretty much everything in a record time, I thought.
Yeah, might as well go for it.
Yeah, why not? Fix the world with Naval on Clubhouse. I think I'm optimistic in a practical fashion. That was another one of the reasons I think a lot of people like your work is that you're a realist and you're very, very practical, whilst being somewhat optimistic compared to a lot of people in the contemporary space.
Yeah, the other day I tweeted out very simple 3 words just because it was the mood I was in. I literally just, this is, like a teenage girl, I just tweeted my mood. But it was optimistic, grateful, and truthful. Yeah. When those 3 intersect, just feel really good. Everything feels right.
Yeah, that's it. That's the foundation. I always say that, the foundation. People are like, Akira the Don, how do you manage to do so much stuff? Why are you so happy all the time? And if you begin from a foundation of gratitude and optimism and act in truth, that's very, very important. The acting in truth. Lots of people don't act in truth and they don't even realize they're not doing so. They're discordant with their true nature or their true beliefs or their true desires or what have you, and that leads to suffering and misery and horror. But gratitude, that foundation.
Yeah, and I think if I had to pick just one, it would be truthful, right? Truth is the basis for a happy life, or at least a life well lived. May not necessarily be happy, but I would say at least a life that you can stake on, that you can stand upon, and not be on shaky ground. Because I think at any time when you're living your life in untruth, deep down some part of you knows, and because it knows, it's never quite satisfied. It's never quite happy. So at least my optimism and my being grateful come from a foundation of truth. I'm grateful. So, for example, with a lot of ungratefulness comes from overlooking what you already have to focus on what you don't have, right? You kind of forget all the blessings you have, starting with just being alive, right? Which is quite the blessing.
Point. Well, just being alive, and then being alive now, and then everything that comes with that compared to everyone who was alive before you.
Exactly. And I was talking to some entrepreneur who was saying that he wanted to be just like Steve Jobs. This was a while back. And I was like, yeah, Steve Jobs is dead. He would swap places with you right now. Right. So, and it's not just being glib. It's true. It is actually truth. But these are the kinds of truths that we just conveniently overlook so we can focus on what we don't have. So, first comes from just acknowledging what you do have. And that is based in truth. And then that will automatically make you grateful. And then optimism actually is not blind optimism, it's rational optimism. It comes from the fact that we have things like science and reason and technology, and we have the scientific method, and we are improving and growing as a species and doing more and more interesting things. And not getting caught up in cult-like beliefs about all the million ways the world is going to end. The Cassandras of the world have been consistently wrong, right? But pessimism sells. The problem is pessimism sells. Pessimism looks cool, and pessimism makes you look smart, but it destroys the quality of your life. And it destroys it in 2 insidious ways. One is, of course, it makes you just a miserable, unhappy person, but then it also makes you chase chimeras and things that don't exist. You're trying to solve problems that may not actually really be problems. And it's sort of like driving a car while looking at the opposite lane. You will end up in the opposite side of the road and probably hit something. So not only is your life going to be a wreck, but you're probably going to, ironically, make the world worse off while you think you're trying to make it better off. So anyway, I think
all the energy that is wasted on these mirages and these fads intergenerationally, because each generation fancies itself as being the one that's facing the apocalypse forever, right?
Absolutely,
All that
absolutely.
energy that could be focused on moving forward rather than chasing ghosts, or rather than doing the thing that would fix the thing anyway if you only to move forward. It's shocking.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
shocking
much more
waste of
about
energy.
social signaling. Yeah, what I've realized is, unfortunately, so I did this "How to Get Rich" tweet storm, and the title is here, "How to Get Rich," and it's a provocative title, right? It's really about how to create wealth.
It's a great title.
It's a
very
fun
clickbait.
title. Yeah, it is totally clickbait. It is absolutely designed to be clickbait, and I revel in the fact that it's clickbait. In fact, if you go back to the original tweet storm, and I believe that was written in 140 character days, which I like better because it forced you to be just more concise. So it's like 36 or 38 140 character tweets. But every single tweet, except for the first one, is designed to be standalone. It is, you can read it on its own, you can retweet it on its own, and it makes perfect sense. And I even leave out tweets. I leave out the numbers. So yeah, the whole thing is a giant exercise in clickbait, right? And that's not an accident.
And stickiness and usefulness.
Yeah, it works.
Usefulness primarily. It's incredibly useful. That was an incredibly useful. I don't like the word content, but it works. It was just an incredibly useful thing, and it was wonderful watching that blow up.
Yeah, it is a playbook that I myself followed. Not all of it, because some of it I only came up with relatively recently, it was realized in hindsight, but the basic structure of it is the playbook that I followed since I was a very, very young kid, and I was just desperate to make money. And I was like, I have to do it. I just have to figure this out. I have to figure this puzzle out. And I didn't know that it wasn't well known. I just assumed everybody else knew it, right? I just assumed that this is how everybody got rich.
You were in the chat yesterday. We had the premiere of the album, and you were in there asking people's questions and saying, "Oh, I suppose I suppose I'm going to have to write a book." But one of the things is, like, once you have some kind of insight or wisdom, you kind of, I always do. You kind of almost instantly assume everyone else knows it, and it's obvious, and then you move on to finding the next thing. And like, you could go your whole life. You could be like, you're 40, you learn a thing, and the day afterwards, you just assume everyone else knows it.
Yeah, and these are hard because wisdom is a little different than knowledge, right? Knowledge is a collective endeavor, and we like as humanity, we can increase our knowledge one after the other, and we can share it with each other, and that's how we build civilization through increased knowledge. But wisdom is the same old stuff. It's the same stuff that was written down thousands of years ago, but wisdom cannot be transmitted. Wisdom cannot be learned by taught. Wisdom can't be learned through somebody else. Wisdom literally has to be embodied and experienced. It is experiential truth. It is embodied truth. And these are much, much more difficult truths to get. So even to the extent that you or I are creating albums or writing tweets, we're not really making people wiser. We're inspiring them to go find the wisdom that they've all and to start believing it, right? It is exactly. To believe it. So even like my tweet storm, if I put I could have put the same exact observations in 2 dry paragraphs of text, right? With no emotion, no nuance, no kind of no poetry to them, right? No careful choice of words. I could have just done it in very, very simple, small words, or I could have just sent out 1 2-word tweet: productize yourself. Right, that's really all it is. Productize yourself. but it would have gotten nowhere, right? So there's an art here, and art is about making you feel that emotion. And I think where I really connect with your work is your work connects people like all art does, and it connects people emotionally like all great art does, but it connects them to making them wiser. Not to making them feel the emotion of, oh my God, I've been through a bad breakup, I want to cry, somebody else cry with me, or I'm so happy, I want to jump and dance, somebody else jump and dance with me. You literally connect them to the wisdom of living and dead philosophers, and I hate the word philosopher, so I probably shouldn't even use it, but insightful people, and they become wiser as a consequence. I've gone for many a run or a walk listening to your Alan Watts music, which I think is like the best Alan Watts remixes available on the internet. Or in the world, and they're incredible because I love Watts. I used to listen to him all the time while working out, but it gets a little dry after a while. But when you pick out the best pieces, the best intonations, you clean it up, you add some music to it, then it just never leaves me. And now it's funny, somebody in your chat the other day, or maybe it was on Twitter, was saying, oh yeah, Naval's like he's closest thing we have to like a modern Alan Watts. Like, actually, I just read and listened to Akira's Alan Watts, and I just really absorbed it. And I believed it at some level. I really did absorb it. Like what he's saying, almost all of it. There are a few places where I have some slight quibbles, but almost everything he's saying is true. And it's hard to deny the truth. And once you hear the truth in anything, in any domain, you feel it. You know it's true. And the sooner you acknowledge it and the sooner you weave it into the fabric of your being, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, and everyone else. I had people write to me a lot. They'll be like, "Oh, I finally understand what Watts Wave Dreams, the Dreams album meant. The one where he is, I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted to." And the end result of that is you dream yourself a wonderful life, and then you start to introduce problems because you get bored of the wonderful life, and you eventually turn yourself into a human. But I have people write to me like, "I've been listening to this for 2 years, and I just got what it means." And they've just been happy.
It's funny because I did really love learning that from your song. I had come to a similar conclusion a different way, which is, people talk about the simulation hypothesis. Well, if you created a simulation, let's say that you're a great programmer and you create the simulation, you're going to create this incredible VR world for you to go into. But pretty soon you're going to realize it's boring because you have the cheat code. You can just do whatever you want. Plus, it's going to be lower resolution than whatever world you just left, because whatever computer you built is not going to be able to simulate itself or the world that it comes from in the same depth. So you have to forget that you're in a simulation, and you have to create a multiplayer game, because that's way more interesting than a single player game. You have to throw away the cheat code. Maybe you leave yourself some hints and clues to realize when things get really bad that, hey, I'm just in my own simulation. But essentially what you're craving is surprise. You're craving something new, and you have to wipe your memory to do it. And so that's just exactly what Alan Watts is saying. But now you've thrown a computer in but instead of God, there's a great programmer. Instead of a universe, there's a computer. Yeah, that's why I think simulation theory is just religion for nerds.
Oh, well, it just is. And then you go, well, it has everything in it. It's exactly the same. It's just a wonderful way of being able to acceptably describe the things that we've been describing and talking about as a people for as long as we've been describing and talking about things. And our society's got a great big religion-shaped hole in it right now. And so you've got one side, you've got some people who are on that religion. Then you've got the people who have the other religion, where they self-flagellate and they have their original sin of whatever it was, whatever way they were born or whatever it is, and all these various things. We have big God-shaped holes in our world right now, and they're being filled, because that hole will always be filled.
I think that's absolutely right. I did not used to appreciate religion. I grew up a very scientific and anti-religion. I remember when I was a child, I would my mother would go to temples and, to pray in India, and my aunts, and they would try and drag me in. As a little kid, I would shout and scream and say no, and I would sit outside on the steps. And I was very, very young. This is like, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And I would just refuse to go inside. I wouldn't even set foot in the place. And mostly not because I was anti-religion, quote unquote. I just thought the whole thing was boring nonsense. You're talking about something you can't see. I haven't seen. We're doing some weird rituals and dances and, colorful things. But like there's nothing going on. It just looks like mass delusion. It looks like groupthink gone wrong. So I was very anti-religion. But what I realized later on is I was anti-organized religion, right? That's not really religion. True religion is when you reject all what other people are saying and you think for yourself and you figure it out for yourself and you create your own relationship with the universe. And you can call that spirituality, or you can just call it reason, or you can call it connection or whatever. But that's true religion to me. So I do think that the people who have no understanding of the universe or no connection to the universe are living very impoverished lives. And I feel bad for them, but you're right in that they are creating their own religions without realizing it. It's almost like if you don't actively choose your religion, then one will be assigned to you.
It's very much the case. It's the same with anything. If you don't, if you don't choose your own habits, they will choose you. If you don't deliberately decide what you're going to do with your thoughts, then things will invade. That's true in everything. And the problem we have is, by just declaring all that stuff silly, it's created this incredible opportunity for some really sort of pernicious and ugly neo-religious cultish kind of systems to take root very quickly. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, in history, you've had a lot of religious wars, and you've had a lot of bloodshed and violence and evil in the name of religion, which I think sort of corrupted the whole concept but again, a corrupt organized religion. And
But
I think
without organized religion, though, organized religion is the corporation, right? When you were a little kid, you saw the corporation. You didn't like the corporation. You thought it was creepy and weird because it was.
Yeah, and the modern versions, when we've seen societies organized around being explicitly atheist, like communist China and Soviet Russia, a lot of the communist creed is like there's no religion, we're all just one people, but that just ends up being the religion of equality or the religion of humanity or the religion of whatever, of Marxism. So they just replace it with another religion. We've seen how that ends, right? Usually very, very badly.
Yeah. Well, it ends in the same way. Yeah, go on.
I think at the end of the day, every human needs to acknowledge that, we're these infinitesimally small things in this incredibly massive, not even universe, but multiverse that is just beyond imagination. Your brain can't even fit the concept of infinity and the universe into its head. So you just have absolutely no idea what's going on. And you somehow have to come to peace with that. Right? You have to come to peace with the utter nothingness of what you are. At the same time, every experience that you have, this entire universe is mediated through you. When you die, effectively, the entire universe disappears. There's no evidence that there is actually anything out there, that you're just basically just floating in a vat or sleeping in a bed and having a hallucination. So these two huge contradictions create this paradox of, you just don't know what's going on. So the certainty that people are operating with is actually, I think, causing them misery. It's better just to acknowledge, I don't know what's going on, and to just be aware, to just be grateful, to just kind of enjoy the journey and the ride to the extent that you can. And that's the beginning of so-called quote unquote spirituality. I hate that word too. I've decided I've heard the word philosophy freedom. And I've heard the word spirituality. Freedom, thank you. Freedom and truth are better words, although now as they're starting to get used more and more, they're getting corrupted as well. But yes, it always happens.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Make
that's right.
Words for the
that's
real
right. But that's part of what artists do, right? They take words that have been overused and are trite, and they replace them with new words that are interesting, right? So, for example, going back to that inspiration is perishable thing, the important thing there is the word perishable, right? You don't normally. Yeah. Everyone knows inspiration comes and goes. If I just said inspiration comes and goes, people, right? Nothing, right? It's that word. It's the word perishable, which everyone's used to, like food perishing, right? So. But not in this context.
That's exactly it. And you know what's really cool is we have a fucking shit ton of words that we don't use anymore. There's so many words that we don't use anymore that we could go out there and dig up and reintegrate.
Yeah, the ones I take advantage of. So I see people who try to tweet and they use very fancy words, right? If they use very fancy words, then people don't even know what those words mean, and their tweets fall flat on their face. And then there are people who use like very, very basic words, very basic. And I try to do this most of the time. But the problem with basic words is it doesn't really make an impression. These words are overused. There's no poetry there. There's nothing to stick to your brain.
Yeah, stick is the word. You want a couple that are sticky.
Yes. So the right thing, I think, to do is to use words that everybody knows, but normally only encounter in a written context, and use them in a spoken context. So perishable is one of those words. Another one of my favorites is escape competition through authenticity. Right? Authenticity is not a word that is normally used by most people in spoken context. It's hard to pronounce authenticity, right? You have to say it relatively carefully. And so, and then I use the word escape, right, as opposed to leave or run away from or drop, right? I don't use like those very short, simple words that are almost too simple. So you just kind of have to find this
drama. That's drama.
Escape is dramatic. Exactly, it's dramatic. A story. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. It's funny. Like the way tweets work for me is I have all these tweet ideas that I write down, and they're always garbage. If I wrote it down to tweet it later, it's garbage. But once in a while, I'm out at dinner, I'm talking to somebody, I'm doing something, and then just these 5 words will land in my brain, and something says, "That's good. Send that out right now. Don't think about it. Just do it." And I just tweet it. And usually those are the good ones.
And the thing is, if you kept it and wrote it down, it would be the exact same thing, but you would look at it later and you wouldn't think it was as good.
This is true. I do have yes, that's right. I have a massive draft folder that there's probably good stuff in there, but now that I can look at it in daylight, it's garbage to me. Or it's inspiration. The moment the epiphany strikes, you just do it. So the best tweets and the best observations, the best thoughts are the moment it strikes in context. It makes sense. You get it out there. And yes, 2 days later, I might look back on that and be embarrassed, be like, oh, what did I just write? Such trite. There goes Hallmark card guy again. But on the other hand, there's, I'm tweeting out to millions of people, right? And it's going to spread along some viral vector, and there's always going to be some people out there who are going to resonate with it. Another thing I've just learned about Twitter is don't overdo it. There are a lot of people who are just tweeting all the time, like they're just filling the gaps with noise. And
oftentimes they're tweeting about how Nifties take up loads of energy. Have you noticed this? The people who tweet, who are upset with people selling Nifties, are the same people who tweet 3,000 times a day.
Yeah, exactly. The Nifties, you're saying burning energy in the blockchain. Yeah, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what money is and how money works. Money is literally just frozen energy, and people will expend enough energy to get money as that money is worth, and so it's equivalent to the value it represents. So whether you do it through aircraft carriers or through lobbyists or through guns and police or through gold mining rigs or through Bitcoin mining rigs, every piece of money on the planet that is worth $1 is chased by the expenditure of energy equivalent to $1. So in that sense, Bitcoin and crypto are actually the most efficient way of doing it, which is rather than have it be hidden by lobbyists and guns, you just do it with stranded energy that can't be reused elsewhere because it's too expensive to transport and it's easy to produce, like some river where they can put up a hydroelectric dam, but there's nobody nearby to take the power, or a wind farm in a really windy area where there's just no transmission lines or batteries will get you to anything useful. So Bitcoin, in a sense, sort of uses stranded energy for doing that rather than politics and lobbyists and aircraft carriers and tanks.
All right, so you need to get that into a tweet storm. You need to get that into like a 5-tweet tweet storm.
Yes, I think this concept is reasonably well understood within the Bitcoin community. There are nuances.
The people who need it. The people who need the issue is the people who need it. Yeah. Currently, the Operation Scare the Normies is underway, and the useful idiots, the self-appointed goody-goodies, are being weaponized with their ignorance and their herd mentality to scare the normies, just at the point where the normies are ready to embrace the new world.
This is true.
Tweetstorm would be useful.
True. On the other hand, I don't do anything because it's useful.
No, it's just a happy side effect.
I'll see if I get it. I'll tell you what the issue is. The issue is that I myself only understand this topic around, I would say 95% to the level that I need to. And I have not dug in to get to the 100, and I'm not going to tweet something that I don't understand at 100. Or at least I feel like I understand at 100. And so the day I understand that at 100, all the puzzle pieces click, then I will do it.
That's a major key for life in general. When people get nervous in public speaking instances or things like that, if you just talk about a thing 100%, no matter what you're supposed to be talking about, just talk about the thing you know about, and then you'll be fine. And then that goes back to the truth idea, right? Of living in truth.
Exactly. And actually, my brother taught me this. He's in the audience right now, but he I think he sent me he got me an Ernest Hemingway book or quote or something, but I saw it through him. And Hemingway has this little paragraph that he writes to himself when talking about when he's having writer's block or when he's having trouble writing, where he says, look, just sit down and write one true sentence, the truest thing you know. That's it.
Yes.
And I think that is that's the secret to anything. Just sit down and do something that you know in your bones to be true, not something designed to influence other people. Because the moment you try to persuade somebody else it's not necessarily true, now you have an agenda. And so you yourself could lie to yourself. You could trick yourself into thinking it's true because you have this subtle agenda of manipulating people, which is another reason why I'm reluctant to do this, Bitcoin mining power thing, because there's a subtle agenda of convincing other people. No, I'll do it when I figure it out myself. And I will write it down, because if I am forced to write it down, then I will remember it. And if I'm forced to write it down in public, then I'll be forced to make sure that it's completely true. So normally if I do a tweet storm, it's because the pieces have clicked in place for a puzzle for me that I've been trying to solve. And then I write it down in such a way that I will remember it, and I can basically check it against the internet, right? There's an old joke that the way to get the right answer is to post the wrong answer on the internet, right? Don't ask the question, just post the wrong answer. Yeah, so that's kind of what you're doing on Twitter as well. Although these days the signal to noise ratio on Twitter is so bad that you're just getting 90 irrelevant answers, 9 crazy people, and maybe 1 good response.
Yeah, it's very distorted. One of the issues we have with social media is that it's as you were talking about persuasion there, one of the rules of persuasion is if you make a public proclamation about something, you will then not wish to go against that. Your self-image will not want to transgress and go against
This
it.
is very, very true. Very, very true.
You would rather hallucinate a weird reality, right? Than and social media is a public extraction machine. People are on there all day saying, here is my public proclamation on this thing I don't know fucking anything about. And then they have to be consistent with that until it's socially acceptable to not be.
Brilliant. Yeah. And this is what the whole Marxist struggle sessions is all about, which is make you confess in public. And then you have to believe that. So, North Korean prisoners of war in North Korea were like forced to write confessions. And then they basically slowly turned and they thought they were communists. And so we're seeing that done on social media now, where people are being forced to virtue signal and extract confessions and say, yes, I believe in this, or yes, I believe in that. And now they have to stick to it. But this is why it's so important to only write the truth and only speak the truth. Because as you said, we are now living in an age of mass public extraction machines, where you extract statements out of people and then they have to rewire their brain to be consistent with their past proclamations, and it's an incredibly powerful form of persuasion. This goes back to being as a thing called consistency bias, but it has been taken to a ridiculous degree. Yeah, in fact, Ben Franklin used to use it quite cleverly. He would go to someone who was a social enemy of his, maybe not like an overt kill you on sight enemy, but someone who didn't like him. And he would be in a public setting, and he would ask that person. He would say, "Hey, I see you have this book on your bookshelf. Or you're reading this book, and it looks really interesting. May I borrow the book?" And this is back in the day when books were very hard to come by. They're very expensive and very treasured. And one of the reasons you chose your friend circle carefully was because you were building overlapping libraries and borrowing and lending books. But it was just on the edge of it was socially unacceptable publicly to refuse to give someone a book that you had on loan. And of course, it was also a way of showing that it's flattery. It's flattery as well. I'm so erudite. You want to borrow my book. You want to learn what I'm reading. So people would loan him the books, and he wouldn't read them. He would just borrow them, and then a few weeks later he would return them. But now what's happened is this person has publicly loaned you a book in front of their friends. So if they've loaned you a book, that means that they probably like you. You wouldn't loan a book to your enemy, right? And so all of a sudden it kind of breaks the ice and starts having the person think more kindly of you. It's a very small example of consistency bias, but I think in social media land now we've weaponized this. It's become incredibly powerful. But the only so this is the modern struggle. The modern struggle is the lone individual. The lone individual has to stand up to the weaponization of struggle sessions via social media, has to stand up to the weaponization of food through processing and junk food, the weaponization of the libido, the sex drive with unlimited pornography, the weaponization of alcohol, drugs. How many Americans do you think are on mind-altering substances of some kind or another? Nearly everybody, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I just mean in general, like prescription drugs. They're taking SSRIs, they're taking Xanax, or they're living in an area where cannabis is legal and they're smoking cannabis and saying, "Oh yeah, this is great, everything is fine," right? Yeah. But there are more drugs being taken right now to calm the mind than are being taken to calm the body, right? So we're just under constant assault, and I'm not saying it's some evil conspiracy theory thing. It's a natural outcome of abundance, ironically, right? We've just taken all the things that used to be scarce in society, and thanks to the miracle of free markets and capitalism and science and technology, we've just created massive abundance.
It's the shadow side of abundance, exactly.
Exactly.
But the solution to it isn't what did they? What's the word? What did they do with booze in the 20s? What's the word for that?
Prohibition.
There you go. Prohibition. Prohibition is never the answer, obviously.
Yes, it's prohibition is censorship, right? It's just physical censorship. There you go. So with the same problems. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I had a tweet that I put out where I said the modern devil is cheap dopamine, right? And that was again linking a bunch of words together normally don't see together, and trying to use words that everybody knows but doesn't normally use. Like most people won't use the word dopamine in a speech in conversation. So that was a good tweet. I like that one, and that was one of the times where I got a good response on Twitter. I actually got some really useful feedback, and there was a lot of crazy feedback. But one person wrote it and said, "Actually, the devil has always been cheap dopamine." And I was like, I think you're right. Like you go back to all the biblical edicts about, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. It's like, don't go get that cheap dopamine and then get someone pregnant and create a battle and or spread diseases. So that whoever responded was correct. The devil has always been cheap dopamine. But what's interesting is the cost of the dopamine has collapsed by orders and orders of magnitude, right? So someone needs to sketch this out, but there's probably a graph that you could draw where you have, time on the x-axis and you have the price per unit of dopamine, however it's measured on the y-axis. And this is, you have to be a little clever about how to define it, but you'd probably find that it looks like,
you
the price
don't
of
have to
transistor.
leave bed anymore. The thing that, maybe back in the day, you'd have to get up, you'd go to the Coliseum, you'd go watch someone get hit with a rock, whatever it was, like throw yourself down a hill to make yourself feel dizzy or something. You literally don't have to get out of bed. You can open your eyes, pick up your little portal device thing, and boom, you're there. In so many of them, in like most.
So there's the philosophical question of the bliss machine, which is if you can put an electrode in your head and stimulate it, and it's all just neurons and chemicals, and you can stimulate neurotransmitters so that you can just live in infinite bliss. You will just feel never-ending bliss. Would you do it? And most people will say no. There's some people who will say yes, and those are unfortunately the heroin addicts in our society, right? People on the street who are homeless, really more of we call it homeless and mental illness, but it's really more of a drug abuse problem, right?
Definitely.
And so there's just a lot of people doing heroin, and they're living inside the bliss machine. And so most people will say, no, I'm not going to do that. I want meaning in my life. Well, it's okay. Well, I'll put an electrode that gives you meaning. Now you have bliss and meaning. It's like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I need variety. Okay, here you go. Bliss, meaning, and the feeling of variety. There you go. How do you feel now? Right? So you can take this to reductio ad absurdum, but maybe that's what we're in now, right? The great simulation, the great programmer / God. We just created ourselves a bliss, meaning, and variety machine to entertain ourselves. So you kind of end up back at square one. But it's just fun to reason through the whole thing.
What would you do if you were God? You end up back at the simulation. You end up back at
exactly.
What's his face in the Matrix saying, "I know the steak isn't real, but it's delicious."
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that he was a rational one. Because Neo is irrational in the Matrix on two levels. One is that he willingly goes into a worse society. He's living in Zion in rags, instead of in.
He didn't really get a choice. He didn't. I don't think he.
Yeah, he didn't get a choice. Fair enough. Fair enough. And in that sense, it was rational because he was. Yeah, but another way was rational because he was truth seeking, right? So he was like, okay, I'd rather live in the rags and eat gruel in truth than eat a steak and drink wine of lies, right? Which, by the way, is not the choice most people would make.
Oh, but hey, guess what? He had the thing that he had, and this is the thing that I on and off quit drinking and substances and things over the years with varying degrees of success. I finally did it a couple of years ago because I made an album in which I sampled Jordan Peterson and Theo Von talking about booze, and Peterson's like, it's not prohibition. You need a replacement for the reason you're doing it. You need an adventure. And what Neo had was an adventure. And when she put that adventure into your life, whatever it is, that will replace those other things.
That is a very good point. The adventure replaces the comfort. So in that sense, he sort of chose meaning for his life as opposed to just creature comforts. Very good point. Yeah, and I think the second part where I think Neo went off the rails is that he just assumed that Zion is a real world. Once you've been shown that you're inside of a simulation, how do you know where it stops? It's simulations all the way down. It's actually the existential end of your life because now you're never going to be satisfied. In fact, the only way you could be convinced you're not in a simulation is if you're in something that doesn't render anything, like a plain white room or a plain black room forever, aka death. So I think if you were shown to be in a simulation, if someone came up to you and proved to you that you were in a simulation, then the philosophical endpoint of that is mental death.
Or it depends if you accept it. If you go, okay, what's the argument? I think I heard Elon say something along the lines of that he quite liked simulation theory as an idea because it means it could be hacked. I don't know if he actually said that or if I.
Well, the problem is that these people are agnostics. No one's a true believer, right? If he truly 100% believed he was in a simulation, then I think he would behave very differently. Or the same way, if you truly, it's like, look, a lot of we all live our lives as agnostics, right? If you truly believed you were mortal, then you would know that your life is going to end and this is all going to zero, and you would live very freely and very happily. At the same time, if you truly believed you were immortal in whatever sense, you had an immortal soul, or you had some kind of a non-dualistic interpretation where it's like all awareness, then you would also live freely and at peace, because you would realize that you're immortal, so none of this should bother you. But everybody's an agnostic. Everybody actually doesn't know.
Yeah, it's true. Apart from those, and that's I think a good definition of those few people we hear about across history who do remarkable things. It's people who've let go of that.
The Buddhas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The Buddhas and the Jesuses and the whatever it is
right.
Those people.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a good spot to end it, unless you got anything else you want to chat about.
There's a million. There's a million things, but I do have a album launch party to go and DJ on the internet.
Amazing.
over on
Fantastic.
YouTube. We're gonna go play all the songs from the new album from world renowned international rap superstar Naval Ravikant.
Actually, I love the ones with Nivi.
I was about to say Rivy is like, he's got two joints on. He's
Nivi,
like the rap hook guy. He's like the 2021 Nate Dogg.
So good. Which one was the one at the end that Nivi has the hook on at the end of the album? What's the name of that song?
The new album is Best in the World.
Yes, that one.
Yes, become the best
so
in the world. What you do? Yeah, he's got this great way of speaking.
He does.
He kind of speaks in this sort of staccato-y kind of, I don't know, each word's in this kind of pocket of being. Everyone has a different flow. You've got a very specific flow. You speak in kind of little clusters. So if you isolate your right clusters, you'll literally have like a section of a rap verse without having to do anything to it, because you kind of speak in these explosive.
I speak in tweets.
Yeah, there you go. You just yeah, that's the kind of futuristic super being you are. Nivi's like, boom, he lays it down like he's like a rapper. He's like a rapper.
It's amazing.
Each thing has a space in the cosmos. Well, yeah,
this
was wonderful. This was wonderful. Thank you for I think we covered a ridiculous amount of ground, particularly when I was like, I guess we'll just talk about music. I'll ask him what songs he listened to when he was a kid, things like that. And no, none of that. So maybe we can do that next album.
This was fantastic. Thanks for being an optimistic, grateful, and truthful musical genius and putting it all together. Thanks, everybody.
Yo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being a Naval.
The most interesting and the most important form of leverage is this idea of products that have no marginal cost of replication. This is the new form of leverage. This is only invented in the last few hundred years. It got started with the printing press. It accelerated broadcast media, and now it's really blown up with the internet and with code. So now you can multiply your efforts without having to involve other humans and without needing money from other humans. This song is a form of leverage. This album is a form of leverage. Long ago, I would have had to sit in a lecture hall and lecture each of you personally, and I would have maybe reached a few hundred people, and that would have been that. 30 years ago, I would have to be lucky to get on TV, which is somebody else's leverage. They would have distorted the message, they would have taken the economics out of it or charged me for it. They would muddle the message, and I would have been lucky to get that form of leverage. But today, thanks to the internet, I can buy a cheap microphone, hook it up to a laptop or an iPad, and there you are, all listening. This is leverage. This is leverage. This is leverage. There you are, all listening. This is leverage. This is leverage. This is leverage. There you are, all listening. This newest form of leverage is where all the new fortunes are made. All the new billionaires. The last generation, fortunes were made by capital, but the new generation, fortunes are all made through code or media. Now the beauty is when you combine all of these three. That's where tech startups really excel, where you take just the minimum but highest output labor that you can get, which are engineers and designers, product developers, and then you add in capital. You use that for marketing, advertising, scaling, and you add in lots of code and media and podcast and content to get it all out there. That is a magic combination, and that's why you see technology startups explode out of nowhere, use massive leverage, and just make huge outsized returns. This is leverage. This is leverage. This is leverage. There you are, all listening. This is leverage. This is leverage. This is leverage. There you are, all listening. The most interesting thing about the new forms of leverage is they are permissionless. For labor leverage, somebody has to decide to follow you. For capital leverage, somebody has to give you money to invest or turn into a product. But coding, writing books, recording podcasts, these kinds of things, these are permissionless. You don't need anyone's permission to do them. This is leverage. This is leverage. This is leverage. There you are, all listening. This is leverage. This is leverage. This is leverage. There you are, all listening. This album, this media, this song, this album, this